TransFit. She'll also be talking at the end about more nutrition and how that affects our hormones. If you guys haven't met Katie Woodall, there were Katie's, but she's in here. She's back here greeting some people. Katie's here. I just like to introduce our staff that's here. Lisa Patton is here. Elizabeth Norris, who you all met out front here today, and this is Gracie Bush. She does lots of operations with us. So just wanted to introduce our staff, and we're so thankful for you guys for being here today. All of our merchandise for you guys today is 10% off. We just wanted to tell everybody that. So just if you've been eyeing something, just know that this will be up front after. And we are so grateful that you guys are here. So I'm just going to let Brooks take my, and please y'all feel free to eat while Brooks is talking. Like, don't be like, oh, I'm an allowed eater. Like, it's called luncheon. Right? So we really want you to eat your lunch. Enjoy every morsel of it. And there was just a little small, like portion controls, little chocolate peanut butter treats. That was also our chocolate on your lunch as well. So, okay, Brooks, take it away.
Thank y'all so much for having me. I'm Brooks. Like Caroline said, I am within walking distance. You could literally throw a rock and hit my office. I'm at the Ashford Center. So if anyone is looking for a gynecologist, I'm sitting down for just a second and I'll stand up. You guys looking for a gynecologist? I'm accepting new patients over there. And we'd love to see you. We don't do OB, which I think most of our clientele here today is maybe kind of past pregnancy, which is a good thing. So anyway, that's what I focus on. But I wanted to, when Caroline asked me to talk about hormones, the topic of hormones is so broad. I could do an hour-long presentation on nutrition hormones, on perimenopause and hormones, on menopause and hormones, pregnancy and hormones. So I tried to kind of condense this into sort of something general in the beginning. We're going to kind of talk about what hormones are, kind of give you a basic understanding of what they do in our bodies. We're going to talk a little bit about the menstrual cycle, and even if you're kind of post-menopausal, where you're not having a menstrual cycle anymore, it's still really beneficial to understand what it is and what's happening in our body, so that when we do go through changes, we can know what's going on and how to address those. So I'm going to kind of fly through it. I'm going to slow down in a few spots and iterate some things, but I really want to leave some time at the end for questions. So y'all feel free. If you think of a question while I'm going through it, if you're like me and you just write it down or put it on your phone, because I'll forget to do that. And then at the end, we're going to do a little Q&A, because I would love to hear from y'all. All right, let's get started. Oh, and I do have this little Instagram account called the Women's Health Company. And so it exists, it's my hobby, it's my creative outlet at this point, just to help educate and encourage women on all things health. So, and faith, and because it's really neat. One of the things I love about women's health is the more that we know our bodies and the more that we understand how we were created, the more in awe I can be the love of our creator, which is really cool. It's amazing. Women's bodies are incredible, and so just to know all the intricate ins and outs of how God created us is such a beautiful thing. So anyway, let's get started. I am going to stand up. Okay. Raise your hand if you can relate to this. Warning, due to influence of hormones, after birth, the tears will kill you in the next 5 minutes. I don't think you understand how these hormones work. You're going to make me do something that'll end up on the news. Anybody? So what are hormones? Hormones they're a chemical messenger that travels through our bloodstream to tissues and organs. So it's interesting to think how, if you've ever gone through a hormonal change, whether it be with pregnancy, with postpartum, with perimenopause, or menopause, when you experience, or PMS in general, when you experience some rise and falls and even some imbalances of hormones, you know that it not only impacts, hot flashes and night sweats, but your mood, your metabolism, your thinking, your brain chemistry in a lot of ways, not just mood, but just your ability to remember things, your heart. It's just a fun fact, but one of the primary symptoms of perimenopause and menopause when women have low estrogen is heart palpitations. And so something that we can start to see over time doesn't mean people have heart issues, but it's a symptom of low estrogen. Anyway, hormones actually influence lots of processes in our bodies: growth and development, metabolism, which is how our body gets energy from the foods that we eat, reproduction, mood, body temperature, thirst, and so much more. So obviously they are powerful. This is just a great, can you all see this? This is a diagram of our endocrine system. So hormones aren't just what we think of: estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. We have several glands in our body that are a part of the endocrine system that produce hormones. So we have thyroid hormones, we have growth hormones, we have pancreatic hormones, we have insulin, all of those things that regulate blood sugar. It's kind of an intricate thing. So not just our ovaries produce hormones. So for women in particular, we have what we call a cascade of hormones. And this is the picture, a diagram of the brain. So the brain secretes a hormone called GnRH, which is gonadotropin releasing hormone. I'm gonna give you all an anatomy lesson real quick. That comes to our pituitary gland. Our pituitary gland then produces a hormone called luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which travels to our ovaries. And it's interesting, so this is what they do. It's a messenger. So it travels through our bloodstream to our ovaries and it communicates something. So it communicates to the ovaries to produce a follicle. If we are in premenopause, when we're ovulating, those hormones actually stimulate our ovaries to produce a little immature egg and to mature that egg. And in turn, the ovaries secrete estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And it's kind of a feedback. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's just, so sometimes, and this is why I'm a big proponent of, especially in women who are in their 30s and 40s, if there's something in teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, if hormones are kind of out of balance, estrogen levels are low, it's important to kind of make sure that it's not just that it's coming from the ovaries and there's not something going on with the brain. Does that make sense? That's causing a disconnect there. Okay, so we're going to talk really fast about the menstrual cycle because it is important. So the menstrual cycle, I consider it the fifth vital sign because it can tell us so much about our health. And even if you're not having a menstrual cycle, if you're peri or postmenopausal, it tells us, okay, my ovaries have basically stopped functioning. So it is a great way to kind of tell what's going on with our overall health. When period health may be directly linked to our overall health in a number of ways. So if we're in our 20s, if a young woman in her 20s and she's not having a period, then that's concerning to me if she's not on birth control, if she's not on something to suppress her ovaries. Because that can tell me, okay, either she has a metabolic condition that's causing a disconnect, something like polycystic ovarian syndrome. If her estrogen levels are low, there could be something going on with her brain that's causing a disconnect, that's preventing her ovaries from producing estrogen. She could have something going on with her nutrition, or she could be over-exercising or under-exercising. So there's a number of things that our period can tell us about our overall health. So in general, and I'm going to fly through this really fast, but cycle day 1 is the first day of active bleeding. This is from adolescence on. So cycle day 1, when you were tracking your periods, is the first day of active bleeding. You need a pattern to move on all day. Typical cycling. So from day 1 of bleeding to day 1 of the next cycle is around 21 to 35-ish days. But we're going to talk about this in just a second too, but ovulation occurs mid-cycle. It's not, I say 21 to 35 days, meaning that everybody's cycle is a little different. So mine might be 21 to 23-ish days each month. Someone else may be 34 to 37 days each month. I want them to only vary by 1 to 3 or 4 days typically. Sometimes 5 is okay, but so if my cycle was 21 days, and then the next month it was 40 days, and then the next month it was 21 days, and the next month it was 30 days. It couldn't vary that much. That's usually an indicator that something's going on, hormonally, basically. So, and it's common in adolescence. Some of you may have teenage daughters who are kind of going through this, but it's very typical as the ovaries are waking up and producing these hormones for us to see some variation, and that's okay. I'm not as concerned with that. And it also, we're going to talk about perimenopause. It's very typical as we start to approach menopause, even within 10 years of approaching menopause, for us to start to see some variation. But if that's happening, then I usually say, it may be worth us looking into that a little bit. Okay, so what's normal? What's not normal? Everybody's normal is different. So like I said, my cycle may be 28 days apart. Some Leah's may be 35. Mine may last 3 days, hers may last 7. So everybody's normal is a little different. But it's good to kind of know what your body is like. Like I said, 21 to 35 days apart is typically considered normal, but we don't want much variation in the length. What's normal with how heavy it is. So low lasts 3 to 7 days usually. Normal is typically soaking less than a pad or tampon every couple hours. Clots that are usually less than the size of a quarter. Symptoms that are typical, pretty normal, mild cramps, mild mood swings, normal flow bleeding that's not bothersome to you. And then, now, I believe the terminology of what's abnormal and normal is basically what you consider normal or not for you, basically. But mild energy changes. So things that, it's normal for us to recognize some of these changes. What's not normal is for our cycles to be less than 21 days. So if you're having a period every 18 days or every 14 days, not normal. Or they're lasting more than 35 days. So you're going more than, 2 months almost without a period. And if they're varying by more, if the length is varying by more than, and when we're, like I said, when we're in adolescence and perimenopause, it's okay to see some greater variation, but it's usually a sign that we may need to check things. Period flow that's lasting less than 3 days. So if someone is only spotting for 2 to 3 days and they're not on any form of hormone suppression or birth control or anything like that, that's typically not normal. Or if it's lasting longer than 7 days. If someone's soaking a tampon or a pad more frequently than every 2 hours. So if you're having to change a pad every hour or a tampon every hour, that's typically not normal. We don't want you to have to deal with that. And then if the clots are larger than the size of a quarter, typically not normal. Extreme pain, not normal. Life-altering mood swings, extreme fatigue, migraines, anything that's just interfering with your daily life, not normal. Common maybe, but not normal. There's a big difference. One of the things I tell my patients all the time when we do blood work is, if I do blood work on somebody, for instance, this is just a side note, thyroid hormones. The lab will give me normal ranges. There's a big difference in normal and optimal. So just something to think about. Okay, I'm going to actually kind of breeze through this too really fast so that we have an understanding. So there are two phases to our periods, the follicular phase and the luteal phase. So the first half of a woman's menstrual cycle is when follicular means a follicle is maturing. And so our brain is sending those hormones to our ovaries to stimulate an immature egg to reach maturity. And at this point, estrogen, I'm just going to fly through this too. Estrogen is starting to rise. When we have our period cycle day 1, everything is low. Y'all know that feeling when right before your period and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm dragging, I'm tired, I want to And then day one, you start your thinking, okay, I feel like I know why this is happening, and then you kind of start to feel a little bit better that week after. So that week after, hormone levels are rising. Estrogen is the primary hormone of the follicular phase. So early in the follicular phase, the very first part of our period, low energy, cramps, mood swings, bleeding. Then mid to late follicular phase, as we're getting ready to ovulate, women will start to experience a little bloating due to water retention because of the rising estrogen. Increased energy, increased athletic ability, so you can come in here, TransFit, and kill it with your exercises. Happy mood, increased libido. So as estrogen rises, we start to feel better. Sometimes estrogen can cause a little bloating, and we're going to talk about hormone replacement therapy in a little bit. This is just a side note. With hormone replacement therapy, we want to be in a sweet spot. We don't want to be too low, but we don't want to be too high, because if we're too high, we start to have fluid retention. So we just have to monitor that. And then the luteal phase, the last half of our menstrual cycle. So we ovulate, and when we ovulate, we start what we call the luteal phase. And what happens on the ovary when it releases an egg or a mature follicle, it forms this little, they call it corpus luteum, means yellow body. So it forms this little, if we looked at an ovary on an ultrasound, just ovulated, we see a little cyst basically. But it has this little yellow fatty substance around it that's called corpus luteum. And what that corpus luteum does is it produces progesterone. So progesterone is the hormone of the last half of our menstrual cycle. And what's interesting, this is another little tidbit, little side note. So if we test hormones, I think we'll probably get some questions about this too. There are several times when patients come in to my office and they say, I was told that I have estrogen dominance, and I have a progesterone deficiency. And if I kind of interrogate a little bit, I say, okay, are you having a period? Yes. When were your levels tested? Well, they were tested, maybe a day or 2 or 3 days after I started my period. And my estrogen was high and my progesterone was low. That's normal. That's excellent, because we don't have progesterone in the first half of our cycle. And so that can get really confusing if hormone tests aren't done appropriately. It's a big waste of money, because if you're not timing it correctly, in some cases, depending on if you're having a regular period, if we're not timing it correctly, then we can get really confused about what's happening, and then we end up taking, medication that we may not need. Anyway, the luteal phase, the last half of our cycle, can last anywhere from 11 to 17 days. From the time that we ovulate, progesterone rises, estradiol also rises after it initially dips when we ovulate. And then the brain recognizes that we ovulate, so it stops producing as much of that follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone. Energy levels become stable. Mood is more kind of melancholy. Progesterone is what we call our melancholy hormone, and so it can kind of cause us just to be a little, relaxed, chill. If you ever take progesterone, it's better to take it at night because it can help you sleep. It can make you tired during the day if you take it during the day. Same with progesterone on the birth control. A lot of nursing moms take progesterone on the birth control to make sure that it doesn't impact their milk supply. I always recommend taking that at bedtime. Bloating and constipation can occur in the second half of our cycle because progesterone is rising. It actually can slow our gut motility a little bit. So this is a real fun little graph. This is what is happening all throughout our body during the menstrual cycle, a normal menstrual cycle. Our ovaries are producing, they're growing the follicle, we ovulate, we produce the corpus luteum, and then it breaks down and forms something called a corpus albicans. Our body temperature is low, and then we see a rise after we ovulate. Hormones typically low, estrogen starts to rise. We see a surge in the luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormones, and then it goes low again. Estrogen and progesterone you can see there. And then the uterine lining, which is something I want to talk a little bit about too. So when we have a period, that's the shedding of our uterine lining. That's when our brain has recognized, hey, I'm not pregnant. Let's shed that lining. So that's a period. And then throughout the cycle, as hormones are rising, our uterine lining is thickening again. And then when we aren't pregnant, the period is the shedding of that line. Okay, this is the good stuff. I know this is what y'all came here for.
I don't know if you want to stop or not.
Yeah, that's fine.
Can you show us in that bottom part where, yeah,
Yep.
on that one, where is your period happening there? I mean,
Good question. This is the period. This is cycle day 1.
Okay.
So this is the period. This is when the period is happening, and then this is when everything's
Builds up.
going back up, and then it happens again. Great question.
Cool.
Great question. All right. So this is a woman's life in hormones. It starts at 25, which I don't think there's anybody, maybe a few people in here that are younger than 25. I think we're all in our late 20s and on. I know I'm well beyond 25. But it starts at 25. So if you can see here, estrogen. And a lot of times too, what's funny, what's interesting, if you see estrogen, that's a European spelling for estrogen. So a lot of times in Europe, they spell it starting with an O. So this is a European graph. But what's interesting, so at 25, you see kind of everything's stable. Everything's great, pretty good. Then we hit 35. And things kind of start to go haywire a little bit. So when we hit about right here, do you see this? You see the estrogen go doop doop like that. Same with progesterone, it kind of starts to teeter off. Testosterone starts to drop, and melatonin does too. So you hear about women in menopause who have trouble sleeping. It's caused by all of these things. Everything's low. So basically, let's get my next slide. Yeah, we're gonna talk about perimenopause a little bit. So perimenopause means around menopause. And if we think about our ovaries, they're glands. But I kind of like to equate it to like an engine in a car. An engine in the car has so much life, and then, when an engine in a car starts to run out, you think about a car, the engine's dying, you think about the car, it'll go forward, and then it'll kind of stop, and then it'll go forward, and then it'll kind of stop, and then our ovaries do that in perimenopause. They'll kind of, be smooth and doing their thing, and then they'll stop a little bit, and then they'll spurt, and then they'll stop, and then they'll give us a spurt, and then they'll stop. And that can send a woman for a tailspin. So the average age of perimenopause it varies. Symptoms can begin 10 years before someone goes through actual menopause. And so in some women, that's in their early 30s or mid-30s. In some women, it's in their 40s. The average age range is between, I think, 40 and 44, somewhere in there, of perimenopausal symptoms. Symptoms that we start to see as this starts to happen with the ovaries is they just kind of start to, they only can produce so much. Unfortunately, they don't outlive us. We very much outlive our ovaries. The symptoms can be, we start to see a fluctuation in those menstrual cycles. There's a disconnect because the way that the cycle has been in our 20s, not really our teens, but in our 20s and early 30s, it's been very, predictable. And then when the ovaries kind of stop producing what they were, we can start to see cycle irregularity. So periods can vary. Periods can become heavier. Mood fluctuations can become much more drastic. Metabolism can start to wane a little bit. We can start to see some changes in metabolism. We can start to see brain fog, all these things that we see in menopause as well, we can start to see early. And it can actually be greater in perimenopause because we're all over the place. And so anyway, that's what perimenopause means. And here's the thing that's interesting. So meno means monthly, pause means stop. Menopause means stop the monthly. But that can be a little bit confusing because we have all of these things that stop our periods, right? IUDs, birth control, ablations, hysterectomies. And those things don't touch the ovaries. And so a woman who has an IUD who's not having a period is not menopausal. Or a woman who's had a hysterectomy who still has her ovaries is not necessarily menopausal because her ovaries may still be producing hormones. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit confusing, but it's in a typical cycle. If we weren't using any of those things, this would be what we would see. Menopause, like I said, stopped the monthly. The average age of natural menopause, meaning it's not induced by a hysterectomy where we take the ovaries or anything like that, is around 51. And what menopause means, if a woman is menopausal or in menopause, she has gone a full year without a period. If she was having a period. If not, so in women who don't have a uterus or have had, we do a lot of the endometrial ablations at our office, have had an ablation and aren't having periods, we do blood work to check that. And usually we kind of, and here's the thing about blood work, as you know, as you saw, I can check it one day and it can be normal, and I can check it the next day and it can be down the kitchen sink. And so we base a lot of it from symptoms, but sometimes there is some value in checking it to see where people are so that they know. Especially from just a general health standpoint and from a fertility standpoint, if I have a patient who does have a uterus and has had an ablation, we still, with an ablation, it's not considered birth control. And so we check labs, say, okay, you definitely cannot conceive at this point based on your blood work. Symptoms of menopause. So I would say you think that the number one symptom of menopause is hot flashes and night sweats. So with menopause, what happens is once you've gone a year without a period, or we know that your estrogen levels are low, if you're not producing estrogen, you're not making progesterone because you're not ovulating. And so also testosterone is a key player. We're going to talk about that too. You're not producing really any of those hormones. And so symptoms of those all being low are obviously hot flashes and night sweats. That's what brings most people into my office to talk about menopause, hot flashes and night sweats. People say, I can't take it anymore, but it's not typically the most common because some people experience those and some people don't. Some people will go through menopause and say, I didn't experience symptoms of menopause, but when I kind of question, well, did you have this, and they're like, oh my gosh, yes. So some of the other symptoms of menopause are obviously hot flashes and night sweats. Weight gain around the middle is a big one. Fatigue, brain fog, memory loss, ability, kind of being mid-sentence and stopping. I don't know what I was just saying. I just had a baby last year, and you kind of go through that during the postpartum as well. But so weight gain around the middle, visceral fat can come into play because of estrogen being low, brain fog, mood fluctuations, anxiety, depression, heart palpitations, dry skin, vaginal dryness. I'm sorry, I'm making this sound terrible. It's not all bad. But there are things we can do about it. So,
has that all been stop once you finish it? What? Or is that just how we live?
It really depends on the woman. Some people, it's worse during perimenopause when things are just going crazy. And some people, usually within the first 10 years, is when it's the worst. And then after about 10 years, people, and I know that sounds like a decade, is usually but here's the so I am a big proponent. We're going to talk a little bit about this, and I'll send y'all some information on it. But I'm a big proponent. If someone is symptomatic and not feeling well, studies have totally debunked the downside of hormone replacement therapy in the right women. And there are other things we're going to talk about this too. Exercise is huge when it comes to not only protecting your bone health, but also because when the estrogen levels drop, bone health declines. That's when we start to see osteopenia and osteoporosis. So exercise is one of the biggest benefits to that nutrition. We're going to talk about this, but I'm a big fan of not suffering through it. It's actually, studies have shown that the sooner you treat, not just the better that you feel, but the actually mortality, morbidity, and mortality rates decrease. So we'll talk about that in just a second, but it's not all bad, I promise. So key players, estradiol. We have multiple forms of estrogen. Estradiol is the most powerful, potent form of estrogen in our body. Produces that our ovaries produce, and we do get estrogen from other places, not nearly as much. Fat tissue produces estrogen that's not quite as effective as estradiol. But what estrogen does, in addition to reproduction and all those things, it protects our bones. It provides lubrication for our skin, our vaginal tissue. It protects our brain, so it causes. I have a diagram here in just a second that shows the differences in brain synapses with estrogen versus without estrogen. Symptoms of deficiency, hot flashes, night sweats, mood fluctuations, anxiety, heart palpitations, bone loss, all of those fun things. Symptoms of excess. So some women actually have excess estrogen. Particularly, so exercise is a great way to balance your hormone levels out, and eating fiber, eating cruciferous vegetables. Leah's going to talk about this, but women who are obese often have excess estrogen because fat tissue, adipose tissue produces estrogen, and so symptoms of excess could be abnormal uterine bleeding because estrogen causes our uterine lining to thicken. So some women can start to have some very abnormal uterine bleeding with excess estrogen, bloating, weight gain, brain fog. So you can have similar symptoms. So, that's where there's a dance when it comes to hormone replacement therapy too, that we're not giving you too much, but we're not giving you too little, if that makes sense. And then progesterone. Progesterone is one of those things, it's a key player in that it protects our uterine lining. So just how estrogen causes our uterine lining to thicken, progesterone can protect it. It helps it thin back out. It also is the hormone of ovulation. So when we stop ovulating, we go through perimenopause, we go through menopause, we're not producing any more progesterone. But in women who have a uterus, if they ever were to supplement with estrogen, they have to have progesterone because the estrogens can cause that uterine lining to act like you're having your period again, but without progesterone, we call that unopposed estrogen, and that can cause uterine cancer because progesterone just protects that uterine lining and keeps it very thin. In women who don't have a uterus, who've had a hysterectomy, they do not need progesterone. It's actually safer for women who don't have a uterus to not take progesterone, but you have to use it if you're replacing and you have a uterus. So symptoms of progesterone deficiency. So somebody who's not necessarily ovulating and not producing progesterone, people can have very irregular spotting because they can have estrogen excess. Anxiety. Progesterone is sort of our melancholy hormone, so it can kind of calm us down. So in the event of deficiency, people can just be anxious and kind of jacked up. And then symptoms of excess can be bloating, fatigue, brain fog, acne. We see that sometimes in people who take progesterone for birth control, sometimes with progesterone only pills and IUDs. They can be great and help a lot of things, but in some women who are more sensitive to this hormone, we can see acne and bloating and hair loss and things like that. And then testosterone. So this is one that doesn't get a lot of face time with women, but we need it. We need a little bit of testosterone. And so our ovaries, I consider testosterone like the earrings to the outfit. It's an accessory, but it's still beneficial. And it is usually, when our ovaries, when we go through perimenopause, it's usually the first one to go. because our ovaries are trying to keep us in that reproductive state. And so they say, okay, we don't necessarily have to have the earrings, so we're going to throw the earrings out and just try to stay alive. But testosterone, the benefit of testosterone is metabolism, mood, energy, libido, bone health, those sorts of things, symptoms of deficiency, fatigue, metabolic issues. We start to see weight gain. Low libido is typically the #1 complaint of testosterone. And then symptoms of excess are, think about a man. Facial hair, chest hair, acne, deepening of the voice, those sorts of things. So there is a dance when it comes to testosterone as well, but it is a key player. Okay, so treatment options. I think we're running out of time, so I'm gonna let you talk about nutrition. I'm gonna talk really briefly. After kind of talking with y'all and mingling, I got an idea of what I think y'all want to talk about. And so lifestyle and products. I'm just gonna say a brief thing about lifestyle, which is so important. And obviously this is why we're here. Exercise transforms your body. And so lifestyle, I'm gonna let Leah talk about nutrition, but from a lifestyle standpoint, when it comes to perimenopause and menopause, which I think is where all of us are headed in the next decade, exercise is one of the biggest things that you can do for your bone health, for your brain chemistry, and for your metabolism. So I'm going to send out maybe some resources too on the benefits of exercise and the types of exercise. I've seen the classes that Caroline offers here at TransFit, and I think that there's a perfect mix of all of the different things that you can do here to not only impact your bone health, but your heart health and your metabolism. And so I would say just join TransFit and you'll be fine. You don't even have to worry about it. It's just taking the brain work out of it. And then products. So just from a lifestyle standpoint, there is a lot of emerging evidence. If you follow me on Instagram, I talk a lot about fertility on there because I have a lot of women who are kind of in that age range too. There is astounding studies now that are showing the downside of certain things in our products that particularly related to plastics. And if you have daughters, this is a big thing I recommend. It's just trying your best till we cannot avoid plastic altogether. It is impossible, but just little things to limit your BPA exposure. So there are things called endocrine disruptors, and BPA is probably at the top. BPA and phthalates. So I'll just say two things about those. Those are probably at the top when it comes to, they act as, they can mimic hormones in our body, and so they can cause just a slew of weird things to happen in our bodies. BPA particularly, bisphenol A, which is in most plastics. So I recommend just trying your best to store your food, like when you put it in the fridge, if you have leftovers, store it in glass. When you have coffee from Starbucks or Trader Joe's, taking the top off and drinking from, not drinking through the hot plastic. So heat and plastic are when we really get the most exposure. So little things like that. I mean, everything is stored in some sort of plastic most of the time, but little things, studies have shown that even tiny changes can make a big difference in women's hormone levels when it comes to balancing them out. HRT, hormone replacement therapy. So when it comes to hormone replacement therapy, there are so many nuances to it, and there are so many options that it can be really overwhelming and really confusing, and it is very, very, very taboo. So just from a history standpoint, there was something back in the 80s, there's a women's health movement, a feminine movement, to what they started to notice in the 70s and 80s was that when women went through menopause, we started to see all of these chronic diseases come. We started to see heart disease, we started to see osteoporosis and osteopenia, dementia, mood disorders, vaginal issues, particularly vaginal dryness and discomfort. And so studies started to emerge and showed the benefit of estrogen therapy, because we knew what the initial studies showed was when estrogen dropped was when we started to see all these things. So women were given hormone replacement therapy with estrogen. but just estrogen, not anything else. And so what they started to see years later was because that estrogen was unopposed, we had a big rise in uterine cancer because the uterine lining was thickening and people weren't, people were like, oh, I'm getting my period back, it's normal. It's not normal. It was causing issues. So then they started to recognize that in women who had a uterus, if we gave them estrogen and progesterone, we could prevent that. And so, things were good for a little bit. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a big study called the Women's Health Initiative. And basically, I think it was like 2001. I have an article on it here that I'll pass around. But basically in 2001, I think, was when the results of the study came out and they said hormone replacement therapy, made a blanket statement. Hormone replacement therapy is detrimental to women. It increases the risk of heart disease. It increases the risk of breast cancer. It increases the risk of dementia and all these things. And so over 50% of women worldwide stop cold turkey. And what's interesting is that has not increased. That has basically, we haven't seen a trend. It's been debunked, and I'll talk about that, but we have not seen a trend upward. So we've kind of maintained what was after the Women's Health Initiative. We have not seen an improvement at all in those chronic diseases that we thought taking women off hormone replacement therapy would benefit. So years later, about 10 years later, I think it was 2010, 2011, there was a reanalysis of the Women's Health Initiative and multiple other studies that really kind of dove down deeper into this Women's Health Initiative study. And what they found was that not only did they debunk a lot of it, what they found was that hormone replacement therapy, what the women that they were looking at, that this initial study was looking at, women were started on it 10 years or plus after they had gone through menopause. And they were started on a specific formulation of hormone replacement therapy that was oral, pretty high doses. And that's when they started to see an increase in heart disease, and an increase in brain issues, and an increase in breast cancer. But what they found consequently later was they went back and they dove down deeper, and the women who were started on hormone replacement therapy younger, when they were in perimenopause, they weren't even started on it when they, or within 10 years of not being on menopause. But those women 10 years later had much better outcomes. They had no heart disease, no high blood pressure issues, or there was a much greater decrease in those things. Osteoporosis, much lower incidence of osteoporosis, and breast cancer. So the thing about breast cancer that was interesting as well was women who did not have a uterus, who were just given estrogen therapy alone, had significantly lower rates of breast cancer than women who were not on hormone replacement therapy. So that tells you something that interesting. So what we've started to realize is that but it is true that women who were on estrogen and progesterone, who had an intact uterus, had a slight increased risk of breast cancer. But we looked at the specific formulation of estrogen or progesterone that was used, and we believe, based on the studies now, that it was that specific progesterone that was increasing the risk of breast cancer. And it's still, again, hormone replacement therapy is not without its risks, but what we've seen over time is, I always kind of tell my patients, women, the biggest killer of women in our is heart disease. And what we found with estrogen, in women who did not already have heart disease, who were not already past 65 and already have, when they started on hormone replacement therapy, and they had healthy blood vessels, the estrogen actually had an oxidizing effect, meaning that it protected their blood vessels and it protected their heart. Because I need to backtrack a little bit. There was a study before the Women's Health Initiative that said hormone replacement therapy reduces the risk of heart disease. So everybody got put on it. Primary care doctors were putting their patients on it. Everybody was getting put on it because it's like, oh, it decreases heart disease. But then when the Women's Health Initiative came out, it confused everybody. It's like, oh, it causes heart disease. So there was some disconnect in what one study was looking at and what another one was looking at. So now what we know is in healthy women and women who don't already have heart disease, who have healthy blood vessels, it has an oxidizing effect. So it can be very beneficial for the heart. It can be very beneficial for bone health. And then there was a study that came out this summer, even better. And I'm almost done. A group of neuroscientists were studying women for decades. And we've always known this in women's health, but when women go through menopause, something changes in their brain. We know that. If you've gone through menopause or perimenopause or postpartum, you know that there is a correlation with your brain function and hormones. And so this study finally kind of gave us ammunition. It was a randomized controlled trial, and then they did what they call a meta-analysis, which is where they looked at all of the studies of women. And it actually, what they found was as estrogen levels dropped, when women went through perimenopause and estrogen levels dropped, we saw a decrease in brain function, and then an increase, I think, in their white matter in women's brains. And so dementia, we know that women are at a much higher risk of dementia, migraines, and mood disorders than men, right? And so what they basically proved was that in women who do things from a lifestyle perspective, exercise, nutrition, and in the right women hormone replacement therapy, would greatly reduce the risk of brain issues down the road, brain function reduction. So anyway, I just say that because a lot of people are scared to death. I have patients who come in and they're like, I've toughed it out long enough and I'm just giving in and I need something. And my thing is, it's actually not, it's not good for you to tough it out. It's actually better for you to take care of yourself and recognize it early and come in early, because you're worth it, your family is worth it, and we can impact not only how you feel, but also a lot of those other things too. So this is interesting, really fast. This is the brain and estrogen. So if you see here, this is a neuron, brain neuron. So this is somebody's brain without it, and then this is somebody's brain with it. You can't tell a huge difference, but what we see is estrogen causes the sprouting of something called dendritic spines. Have you ever heard of neuroplasticity? You may have heard of that. So what we found is estrogen increases neuroplasticity in the brain. And so you think of women who are postpartum, they go through postpartum depression. So often that is 99% of that's hormonal, because our estrogen levels tank. And it really impacts brain chemistry and brain function. And the same happens in perimenopause and menopause. Estrogen builds resilience and protects the brain from aging. This book is awesome. It's called The Women's Brain Book. And it is by a physician. Her name is Dr. Sarah McKay. She's a neuroscientist that is wonderful. I'll send a link to Caroline maybe so that you guys can get that. Okay. I know we're out of time probably.
I want to leave this talk about nutrition.
Yeah,
She didn't get it.
super quick, yeah.
Yes.
Hannah, if you're, if you can get this out the window, her one thing would be like whole foods.
Yes.
The more you can dish the processed things that are on your plate, the better you're going to feel, and the better your hormones are going to function. I know Brookes are on the same page with that, as like load up on the veggies. And that's not like the most fun thing to say, but your rule is like, hey, 50% of my plate is gonna be vegetables, and that's all you focus on. Awesome, start there. And then from there, if you want to increase it and go the next step down, I put 5 foods on here for food groups-ish that you should be focusing on. The one thing I'll say, like the top soy, everybody hears soy and they're like, my son's gonna grow man boobs, or I'm gonna get breast cancer. That is not true. It's been debunked in multiple studies, but all of our eggs in one basket, something we eat that was on rats, and our bodies just don't process like the same way rats do. Surprise. So load up on the organic, non-GMO soy foods, not the Franken beans, not the big stuff, the edamame, tofu, tempeh. You're like, how do I cook this piece of rubber? Let me know. I'll help you. Because it can be really good, but it can magically truly reduce your hot flashes if that's something you're dealing with. Cruciferous vegetables, that kills cancer cells, removes excess estrogen from the body, relieves cramping, bloating. Fiber, we are so deficient in fiber. Our whole country is like stopped pooping. It is just the reality that nobody is getting enough fiber. Even minimum should be 30 grams, and you should be aiming for 50, 60. Yeah,
What is a cruciferous vegetable?
Good
I feel like I
question.
should know that.
So the real life fibers, veggies, the broccoli, the cauliflower. I put a little list on here for you that you can see, but the kale, arugula, Brussels sprouts, all the ones that are like crunchy and probably your least favorite when you were a kid. Let's build that courage muscle in yourself to eat it, and I promise you your kids might start eating too if they see you eat it. But those are the things that are really going to clean out your arteries, move things along. That fiber. I got lots of books in here on fiber. Just fiber can make such a difference in your health and how you feel. Your whole body will function better when things are really wrong. So don't be afraid of carbohydrates. Whole, great, wonderful carbohydrates have the fiber you need to really thrive. Protein is essential for hormones to communicate throughout your body. It doesn't have to be meat. Like I said, tofu is a great option, but lean meats, avocado, eggs, hummus, nuts and seeds, tofu, tuna, chicken. Those are all great things to add to your diet. And then the last thing on here is the essential fatty acids. We are so inundated with omega-6s. They're important, but we are getting plenty. So focusing on those omega-3s. Great sources of omega-3s, nuts, seeds, whole water fish, olives, avocado, eggs. That's all going to make a difference. But I'm Leah Wallace, happy to talk more with you. I know that was like rapid fire. You're knowing how veggies, fiber.
I'd love, just to have a couple of quick questions, if anybody has any for Brookes. I'd love to just have a couple of quick questions or one. Don't be afraid.
I have a question. I saw a question for you in the question. If you have one, I recommend it. If you do, I'll just read it for you. But so I'm on hormone replacement. So I do testosterone and progesterone. And I have a question, and my doctor and I were kind of, I do see different doctor, but do I need progesterone in your opinion? Because I've had inflation.
Yes.
Okay, I am taking it.
Yes.
Because it helps me
You
sleep.
may not need as much, but you do need it.
Okay.
Yes, because even with an ablation, there can be tiny microscopic endometrial cells left. So yes.
I've also had a great passion and I was thinking so.
Yes, it helps you sleep. Wonderful.
Okay, you mentioned products to avoid.
Yes.
I felt an Instagram ad that said there would be 2 zippers and my belly was gonna fall off after 30 days. My belly did not fall off. But do you have products or natural supplements that you think help with these symptoms of hair?
Great question. Yes. So I think I'm with Leah, and I kind of approach it when I sit down with patients. We approach it from a nutrition, lifestyle, supplement, and then medication if needed. So I always say nutrition and lifestyle first, and then supplements can be very beneficial to fill in gaps in their diet, and particularly fiber, magnesium. DHEA is a supplement that can sort of help your body naturally produce more estrogen and testosterone. And it depends on other things. I like to check blood work. To be honest with you, I like to check vitamin D status, B12 status. Women, a lot of women do not have optimal B12 levels. And so I like to test those things first before we just throw people on supplements. But
You shouldn't just order them all.
you should just order them. But I think before the supplement, if you're buying supplements, is that it has third-party testing. That's because the FDA does not regulate supplements. And so, actually, I think it was the New York Surgeon General in 2020, they decided to pull all hundreds of supplements from the shelves and test them to see if they actually had what the label said they had. And 95% did not. Which is crazy. So that's why whole food is the best thing. And I have an article I'll send on that. And it's sometimes actually, do you track like fiber and magnesium and things like that? Sometimes that, even just for a week, so you know, okay, this is what I'm getting, can be really helpful. But I'm always careful to give out brands that I like, but I do like Pure Encapsulations because they have third-party testing and they're whole food based. So what's interesting with that too, a side note is I had a friend that was like, I ordered these off of Amazon, and I got them in and they stink. And she opened them and she sent me a picture. And I take the prenatals from Pure myself, and they're white. They don't smell like they have a little, smell like a supplement. But hers had turned brown and they smelled like rotten food because they were from. They're food based. So you have to be careful where you get it from. I always say you want to make sure you're getting it from like a certified place and that they have third party testing. Yeah.
Rachel, just a question.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So supplements have always kind of scared me because of what you were just saying.
Yeah.
You go into wherever and they're just, I mean, if you don't know, I don't know what to buy and take. So if you were just gonna give one like good suggestion, is there, I don't know if there's a blanket answer for everybody or does everybody need something different? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if you wanted to start taking something, what would you really start?
I would say that most women are deficient in magnesium. There's not blood tests to confirm that. Blood tests will confirm that you have a severe magnesium deficiency and you need to be hospitalized. They do not confirm actual at the cellular level of what our body's doing because our soil a lot of times is depleted. So I definitely, from just a general, I feel good about recommending magnesium. There are different types of magnesium. So for bloating, GI stuff, just kind of abdominal GERD issues, I like magnesium citrate because it stays in the gut. Magnesium glycinate is really good for mood, sleep. It's absorbed in the bloodstream. So magnesium and fiber.
Okay.
Those are my top two.
Okay.
And then omega-3, if you're not getting, if you're not getting like eggs every day and salmon and nuts and seeds, which is so much better to get those in your diet. But otherwise, omegas, like an omega-3 fish oil or DHA and EPA supplement can be really good too. And then from there, it's like,
Yeah. So can you overdo like the omega? Like what if you felt like you weren't getting enough in your diet and then you start taking supplements, but really you had enough in your diet? Does that make sense? How do you, is that bad?
you can, so omega, what's interesting with omega is it can actually increase, it can thin your blood in a good way. It can thin your blood. Like when we do surgeries, we tell people to stop it before their procedure because it only bleed. And women who are pregnant, if they have bleeding, say stop your DHA because it can kind of increase bleeding risk. It's very helpful to take. Otherwise, I would say usually if you stay under about 1,000 micrograms a day, 500 to 600 a day, milligrams a day, you're usually okay. That's a general, and most of us aren't eating, and you can maybe attest to this, most of us aren't eating enough. So I would say, yeah. It's a good starting
I
point.
think everybody is in a different starting place too, depending on what your goals are.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It matters.
Yeah, it does.
Was there a way to naturally increase your estrogen, did you say, besides hormone replacement? Or-
Yes, so healthy fats,
Okay.
avocado, nuts, salmon, almond, butter, things like that can help. And cholesterol, so we think cholesterol is really bad. You need cholesterol to make hormones. So eggs have good cholesterol in them. They're not going to raise your bad cholesterol. Eggs are great. I will say that when our ovaries are teetering out, it's kind of like an engine. If an engine is dying, you can put all the oil in the engine. So in women who are postmenopausal or even perimenopausal, sometimes we can do everything right. And that's my point with hormone replacement. Sometimes we can do everything right and still you can't necessarily cause your ovaries to produce more estrogen. So I always like to start there with diet. With DHEA is a good supplement, and then healthy fats, protein, carbohydrate, just eating a balanced diet, but healthy fats and actually cholesterol help your body make it.
And the amount of DHEA that's like.
DHEA, 25 to 50 milligrams is usually, I usually tell people 25 to start, but 50 milligrams is usually okay as well. Those are kind of usually, I always like to stay in a safe